And we've seen it so far, Jerry, because if it wasn't for good men like Mr. Julian here and Adnan Oktar, Harun Yahya, who've written lots of interesting books for everybody out there, religious or not, Muslim or Christian, or whatever you might be, hadn't it been for the good men like this who sacrificed so much from their own time in order to learn, to teach, to educate, and to create dialogues between our faiths and our people, we would have been lost. We would have been lost in misinformation and disinformation. We would have been all lost. And it takes me to another question. Maybe one of the last questions I would like to ask Mr. Julian is, do you see any obstacles, or what are your greatest obstacles in your everyday work in order to achieve what you are trying to achieve?
Well, there's a number of ways of looking at this. The greatest obstacle is the average, if you like, Christian Muslim don't see interfaith encounter as being integral to their religion. They see it as being an optional extra, or possibly something strange, or something which is forbidden by their faith and by their scripture. So the people who are involved in interfaith, particularly the pioneers, the ones who are really doing great things, are viewed with suspicion in their own community. So I think of one of my good friends, a colleague, an imam in England, and very much at the forefront of interfaith and building relationships with Christians, and that has had a negative impact on how others relate to him, because they think it means he's less of a Muslim, and that he's not committed to seeking others who will come to Islam, and that he's put that on the back burner. Whereas in reality, in interfaith gatherings, he says, well, he was with us this week, that he's committed to Islam as the absolute truth, and that he really hopes that anyone will embrace Islam rather than be outside it. So he is very attached to Islam. And I think of the experiences I've had within the Christian community is that if you're involved in interfaith, then you're a bit of an oddity, and you're probably a wishy-washy liberal. And we need to show that this kind of encounter and building relationships with neighbours and being interested in our neighbours is at the heart of our faiths. And it struck me more and more as I've been pondering on why there aren't more people involved in this. When we look at the example of our founders, so Jesus himself had many interfaith encounters in the Gospels, with a Syrophoenician woman, with the Samaritan woman in John's Gospel, and at the event that we did this week, one of my colleagues was talking about the Roman centurion who comes to Jesus when his servant is ill, with a Gentile, someone who was worshipping many gods probably. He came to Jesus and he asked Jesus to intervene, and he had faith. In fact, Jesus said to everyone who was there, including his disciples, I haven't seen such great faith anywhere. So he praised this man who could have been a polytheist, or however we might like to describe him. And then if you look at the example of the Prophet Muhammad, and you or Jerry might want to say this rather than me, is that he had a delegation of Christians who came to see him at his masjid in Medina, and when it was their time to pray, they were going to go off and pray somewhere else, and he said, no, use my masjid. So right at the heart of our traditions, and right in the lives of our founders, we see interfaith. And then we think it's strange now, and that isn't the case in the Middle East, because I've been or Africa, because I've been talking to some people this week saying how interfaith is completely normal, and you get families which are Christian and Muslim, and they've been living with each other for hundreds and hundreds of years, whereas in the West it's more recent. So the bulk of the Muslim community in this country has only been here for the last 50 or 60 years. So it's new and we're not used to it.
You're right. That's a
that is also true, really, of the U.S. The presence of Muslim or even of other faiths here in the U.S. other than Christianity is not really that new. but the public exposure of it, I think, is. Because after 9/11 is when people really started paying attention, not only to Muslims that are here in the U.S., but of all religions. There, for a while, there was a big thing. I mean, you had Christian parties on one side and Muslim parties on the other side and Jewish parties, and everybody was bickering there for a while. The thing of it is that I agree with you, Julian, that being a fairly new occurrence in places, and I don't think that it's that they haven't been around so much, it's that it was just really quiet until the last 10 or 15, 20 years, that the subject wasn't that pressing. And then after we had the rise of the global quote-unquote war on terror, I think a lot of this brought a lot of things to light and put a lot of people in the spotlight. And I think this, and myself, I think this is by design. I think a lot of governments, including organizations, NGO organizations, non-governmental organizations, have propagated a lot of information to help to further what in their cause would be to spread democracy again, going back to that. Because for some of the wars that have been started, not only with the U.S. has been into, but the United Nations has gotten into, I think a lot of some of the propaganda that they put out is to give them footing to say, this is why we're doing this. This is why we want to go here. This is why we want to go here. And I think a lot of times they use religion as a crutch to further their agendas. And by getting out some of the propaganda that they do, like if you look in the U.S., they want United States people to look at Muslims as somebody with a long, dirty beard and a dirty turban and dressed filthy and carrying guns, and that's the image they portray. And there's a lot that goes on. It's not only Muslims or Islam they do this to. There's a lot of people here with Zionism. They demonize all this stuff because the propaganda that is put out. A lot of people don't. If you mention Zionism to them, the first thing they think of is, oh, well, that's them evil bastards that want to take over the world. They don't understand these terms, and the reason for that is because of media. It's because the way these things have been portrayed, and they're not portrayed factually, they're portrayed the way that the media wants people to perceive them. And that's, if somebody gets all their news and their information from mainstream TV or mainstream news or mainstream newspapers, then they don't see this side of that story. They don't see the news that actually points out what this stuff means and tells the truth about these things, and it misplaces these untruths and the illusion that is put out there by media. So the things that we're doing, the things that you're doing, the things that people around the world right now are getting more into with dispelling this stuff, and as I said a while ago, educating in faith. And I'm not saying that everybody should be Islamic. I'm not saying that everybody should be Jewish. I'm not saying that everybody should be Christian. I'm saying the people that are Christian, the people that are Islamic, the people that are Jewish, of any faith, they need to be better at their faith. They need to look within themselves and bring themselves up to be examples for everybody else and within their faith. We all believe in God. Our faith is all to the same God. And we need to set examples for those others that are within our faith to be good Christians, to be good Muslims, to be good Jews, to go by what the books say, not by what tradition says, to go by what God tells us to do, not by what our neighbors tell us to do, or our government tells us to do, or even our pastor, or a priest, or a rabbi. Yes, those are good sources, but to follow blindly is not smart. Okay, you cannot follow something blindly and do it faithfully. That's kind of an oxymoron in my view, because to be faithful to something, you have to know what it is. That's probably a little over the head of some of our listeners, but
no, but I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, Jerry, because you're putting it in a very logical way, and it is, as you're saying, in order to do your best and your maximum out of yourself, you need to know what it is you're doing. You need to know what it is you have understood. And I completely agree with you there. The best source of all the sources are the holy books, and the good people, the sincere people. I had a question once. Well, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Christian either. I'm just a regular Swede, and I would like to know from you, my dear friend Edin, how can I distinguish a sincere Muslim from a non-sincere Muslim, or a sincere believer from a non-sincere believer? And I said to him, well, my friend, I can't give you that answer because I'm just a simple human being, just as you are, and we are all created. But what I can give you as a logical answer is this. Me as a Muslim, if you look at the world today as it is shaped today, and see the issues we have in the world today, you see the deaths that are occurring today, you see the killings, the raping, the systematic executions, the non-democratical trials, and so on and so forth, and the occupations and the bombings and everything, and you see one passive Muslim sitting and doing nothing, or one passive Christian, or one passive human being sitting and doing nothing, or not caring enough, well, there is your answer. That is the distinguishing between a sincere and a non-sincere believer, and that could be said about a sincere human and not sincere human as well. I think you understood what I meant. What I'm trying to say, we should all try to reach out and give our maximum from that we have, the understanding that we have. Love, doing good, acceptance, tolerance have always been the attributes that have led humanity forward, that have saved us from evil and from fire and so on. It has been a great show. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mr. Julian. It has been great having you on board today, and we have learned a lot. We hope to stay in touch and maybe to visit each other. I'm often in UK, and I hope to see you one time if I get back to London again. Thank you very much for your participation, your thoughts, your inputs, and I wish you all the best in the future of your work and life and family.
That's great. Thank you very much, and to your family and friends also. And what we can do, and maybe the listeners also, is mention any interfaith contacts that they have, either on the radio or on the internet or with friends in the real world, and tell people in their places of worship. So if you go into the masjid later today or tomorrow and say that you've been speaking with Christians, or Christians go into church on Sunday and say that they've been talking to Muslims, then that normalizes things, and people will start to think, well, it's okay to talk to Muslims, and perhaps we need to know a bit more about them.
Yeah, and it's okay to talk to Christians.
Indeed, that's right.
Yes. I want to point out to our listeners again before we leave, Aidan, this is at ChristianMuslimForum.org. You can go on here, and there's lots of things on here. I know, before we get out of here, I want to mention that they have a Women Authority and Leadership in Christianity and Islam that will be held September 10th and 11th, which is this week. And it's on the website if anybody's interested in learning more about that. So there's a lot of information on the Christians and Muslims working together on the Christian Muslim Forum. And Julian, I applaud you for your work. I think you are doing astounding things. And the more we do this, the more people like you and us and other organizations do progress in this, I think the closer we get to peace.
That's and that right. Is the goal. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.